Imagine facing a giant 3 times your size, armed only with a slingshot and a few stones. It seems impossible, right? But that's exactly what the young David did, showing that true strength comes from within. The story of David and Goliath is not just an ancient tale, it's a timeless lesson about courage, faith, and the ability to overcome challenges that seem insurmountable. Today, we'll dive into this inspiring biblical story and discover how we can apply David's bravery to our own lives. Welcome to a new video of Biblical Stories. Today, we will explore one of the most exciting and inspiring narratives from the Scriptures, the story of David and Goliath. This is not just a story about battle, but a powerful tale about courage, faith, and the ability to face life's giants. Let's travel back in time to the battlefields of Israel, where 2 armies were at a deadlock. On one side, the Philistines, with their champion, the fearsome Goliath. On the other, the Israelites, fearful and without a warrior capable of confronting the giant. In this setting, we find young David, a simple shepherd about to change the course of history. David was not a trained soldier, nor a man of great stature. He was just a youth, the youngest of 8 brothers, sent by his father to bring supplies to his older brothers who were in the army. But David had something that set him apart, an unshakable faith in God and a courage that surpassed his physical appearance. Upon arriving at the camp, David encountered a scene of discouragement and fear. Goliath, the Philistine giant, daily challenged the army of Israel, mocking their faith and their God. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, Goliath was a terrifying sight. His heavy armor and imposing weapons caused even the bravest soldiers to tremble. But where others saw an insurmountable obstacle, David saw an opportunity to demonstrate God's power. David was not intimidated by Goliath's size or his mocking words. Instead, he volunteered to face the giant, trusting that the Lord would be by his side. Many questioned David's decision. Even King Saul tried to dissuade him, arguing that he was too young and inexperienced for such a challenge. But David remained firm in his conviction. He shared his experiences as a shepherd, recounting how he had protected his flock from lions and bears with God's help. David's courage was not based on vain confidence in his own abilities. On the contrary, it was founded on a deep understanding of God's character and power. He knew that the same God who had delivered him from wild beasts could equip him to overcome this new challenge. This unbreakable confidence reminds us that, many times, the greatest obstacles in our lives seem insurmountable only because we view them through the eyes of fear and doubt. David teaches us to look at our Goliaths through eyes of faith, recognizing that with God on our side, no challenge is too great. As David prepared for the confrontation, he rejected the armor and weapons that King Saul offered him. He knew that his strength would not come from military equipment, but from God's presence and power. With only his slingshot and 5 smooth stones, David walked onto the battlefield, ready to face the giant who had been terrorizing his people. This moment invites us to reflect on our own lives. How many times do we feel inadequate or ill-equipped to face the challenges presented to us? The story of David reminds us that God does not call the qualified, but qualifies those he calls. He uses the unlikely to achieve the extraordinary. The encounter between David and Goliath is one of the most dramatic moments in the Bible. On one side, the Philistine giant, confident in his strength and armor. On the other, a young shepherd armed only with a slingshot and unshakable faith. The contrast could not be greater, and that is precisely why this story remains so powerful and relevant to this day. Before continuing with this epic confrontation, I want to pause to interact with you, dear viewers. If this story is already touching your heart and inspiring your faith, please give this video a like. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now is the perfect time to do so and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any of our inspiring biblical stories. Share this video with friends and family who may also need a dose of courage today. And don't forget to comment. What has impressed you most about David's story so far? His faith, his courage, or perhaps the way he faced the discouragement of others? When David approached the battlefield, Goliath saw him and immediately began to mock him. The Philistine giant, accustomed to intimidating his opponents with his size and strength, could not believe the Israelites had sent a youth to face him. He disdainfully shouted, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" His words were filled with mockery, attempting to destabilize the young shepherd's confidence. But David was not intimidated. Instead of retreating in the face of Goliath's provocations, he responded with words that would resonate throughout the centuries. "You come against me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." This bold declaration from David was not just a challenge to Goliath, but a proclamation of his unshakable faith in God. It's important to note that David's response was not based on bravado or personal pride. He wasn't relying on his own strength or ability. On the contrary, David was declaring his total dependence on God. He recognized that the battle was not really between him and Goliath, but between the God of Israel and the gods of the Philistines. David's attitude teaches us a valuable lesson about how to face the challenges in our own lives. Many times we feel intimidated by the giants we face: health problems, financial difficulties, complicated relationships, or deep fears. The natural tendency is to look at these problems and feel overwhelmed, just as the Israelite soldiers did before Goliath. But David shows us a different approach. He teaches us to change our perspective, to see our challenges not through the lens of fear, but through the eyes of faith. When we declare our trust in God, we acknowledge that He is greater than any problem we may face. With his slingshot in hand, David ran toward Goliath. The giant, likely surprised by the youth's audacity, advanced to meet him. It was at this crucial moment that David placed a stone in his sling and hurled it with all his might. The stone flew through the air and struck Goliath directly in the forehead, the only vulnerable point in his armor. The impact was immediate and dramatic. Goliath, the mighty warrior who had terrorized an entire army, fell to the ground. With a single well-aimed blow, guided by God's hand, David had felled the giant. He ran to Goliath, took the giant's own sword, and with it cut off his head, sealing Israel's victory over the Philistines. This spectacular victory was not just a military triumph, but a powerful demonstration of what can happen when we put our faith into action. David did not win by being the strongest or the most skilled, but because he completely trusted in God and acted according to that trust. The story of David and Goliath teaches us that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite fear. David, without a doubt, must have felt fear when facing Goliath, but he did not allow that fear to paralyze him. Instead, he channeled his faith into decisive action. This narrative also reminds us that God often chooses to use the unlikely to carry out His purposes. David was not the obvious candidate to defeat Goliath. He had no military training, no sophisticated armor, and certainly did not have the physical strength to compete with the giant. But what he did have, faith, courage, and God's blessing, proved to be more than enough. How often in our own lives do we feel inadequate or unprepared for the challenges we face? The story of David reminds us that God does not call the qualified, but qualifies those He calls. He can use our apparent weaknesses as points of strength, turning our limitations into opportunities for His glory to shine. After Goliath's defeat, the Israelite army regained their courage. They pursued and defeated the Philistines, transforming what seemed to be a certain defeat into a glorious victory. This is another powerful aspect of the story. The courage of one individual can inspire many others. David's faith and bravery not only defeated Goliath, but also ignited the flame of courage in the entire Israelite army. This part of the story invites us to reflect on the impact our actions can have on others. When we face our Goliaths with faith and courage, we are not only changing our own situation, but can also inspire those around us to do the same. David's victory over Goliath marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. He went from being a simple shepherd to a national hero, earning the respect and admiration of the people of Israel. This event was the catalyst that would eventually lead him to the throne, fulfilling the prophecy that he would be king. However, it is important to remember that David's true greatness did not lie in his ability to defeat giants or in his future position as king. His true greatness was in his heart, devoted to God, in his willingness to trust and obey, even in the face of seemingly impossible circumstances. The story of David and Goliath does not end on the battlefield. In fact, we could say that it is only the beginning of an extraordinary journey that teaches us valuable lessons about perseverance, humility, and the importance of maintaining our faith even when we achieve success. After his victory over Goliath, David quickly became a prominent figure in the kingdom of Israel. The people hailed him, singing, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." This sudden fame and popularity could easily have affected a young man like David. However, he maintained an attitude of humility and continued to attribute his victories to God. This is a crucial lesson for all of us. When we achieve success in our lives, whether in our careers, relationships, or personal accomplishments, it is easy to begin relying on our own abilities and forget the source of our strength. David shows us the importance of remaining humble and grateful, always acknowledging that our victories come from God. Unfortunately, not everyone around David reacted positively to his success. King Saul, in particular, became jealous and fearful of the young hero. He began to see David not as a valuable ally but as a threat to his throne. This led Saul to pursue David, forcing him to flee and live as a fugitive for several years. This difficult period in David's life teaches us another important lesson. Victory over one challenge does not mean the end of all difficulties. Sometimes, a triumph can even lead to new and unexpected obstacles. The question is not whether we will face more challenges, but how we will respond to them. During his time as a fugitive, David had several opportunities to take revenge on Saul. In one memorable instance, he even managed to get close enough to the sleeping king to cut off a piece of his robe. However, David chose not to harm him, respecting Saul as the Lord's anointed. David's attitude reveals a deep understanding that true victory is not in defeating our enemies, but in maintaining our integrity and trust in God, even in the most difficult circumstances. He teaches us that revenge is not the path to true peace and satisfaction. Throughout his trials, David continued to seek strength and guidance from God. Many of the Psalms he wrote during this period reflect his struggles, his faith, and his unshakable trust in the Lord. For example, in Psalm 59, written when Saul sent men to kill David, he declares, "But I will sing of your strength, in the morning I will sing of your love, for you are my fortress, my refuge in times of trouble." These words remind us that just as David faced Goliath with faith and courage, we can also face our daily challenges with the same attitude. No matter how big our giants are, whether they are fears, doubts, health problems, or financial difficulties, we can find strength and courage in God. David's story also teaches us about the importance of perseverance. Despite being anointed as the future king while still young, David had to wait many years and endure numerous trials before finally assuming the throne. During that time, he did not remain idle but continued to grow in character, leadership, and faith. This reminds us that growth and maturity often come through difficulties. The challenges we face are not just obstacles to overcome but opportunities to grow and strengthen ourselves. Just as David was shaped by his experiences to become the great king he would be, our struggles can prepare us for the purposes God has for our lives. Eventually, David became king of Israel, fulfilling the promise that God had made years before. Under his leadership, Israel became a strong and prosperous nation. However, even as king, David continued to face challenges and, at times, made serious mistakes. His story does not end with unrealistic perfection, but continues to show us a real man, with flaws and weaknesses, but who constantly sought God. This is perhaps one of the most important lessons we can learn from David. He was not perfect, but he was a man after God's own heart, because, despite his mistakes, he always turned back to God in repentance and sought his forgiveness. This gives us hope in our own walk of faith, reminding us that God does not demand perfection, but a sincere heart willing to follow him. The story of David, from his confrontation with Goliath to his reign as king of Israel, is a powerful testimony of what can happen when we place our trust in God. It teaches us that true courage does not come from our own strength or ability, but from our faith in a God who is greater than any challenge we may face. Dear friends, as we reflect on this inspiring story, I want to pause to interact with you. If this video is touching your heart and strengthening your faith, please leave a like and share it with someone who may be facing their own Goliath today. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do so now and activate the notification bell so you won't miss our next inspiring biblical stories. In the comments, tell us, what aspect of David's story has impacted you the most? How do you plan to apply these lessons in your own life? Now that we have explored David's journey from shepherd to king, let's delve into how we can apply the lessons from his life to our everyday lives. After all, the beauty of biblical stories is not just in their inspiring narrative, but in how they can transform our lives today. First, David's courage challenges us to face our own Goliaths. Those giants in our lives can take many forms. It could be a health problem that seems insurmountable, a difficult financial situation, a strained relationship, or even internal fears and insecurities that paralyze us. David's story encourages us not to be intimidated by these challenges, but to face them with faith and determination. Remember, David didn't defeat Goliath because he was the strongest or most skilled. He won because he trusted in a God who was bigger than his problem. In the same way, when we face our challenges with the conviction that we are not alone, that we have a powerful God by our side, we can find the courage to take the first step toward victory. Another inspiring aspect of David's life is his perseverance. Even after defeating Goliath, David faced years of adversity before becoming king. During that time, he could have given up, questioned God's promise, or sought shortcuts to the throne. Instead, he remained faithful, trusting in God's timing. This teaches us a valuable lesson about patience and trusting in God's plan. Many times in our lives, we may feel frustrated when things don't happen at the pace we expect. David's story reminds us that waiting time is not wasted time. It is during these periods that God often shapes our character and prepares us for future responsibilities. David's humility is also a crucial aspect of his story that we can apply to our lives. Even when he became king and achieved great success, David continued to acknowledge that his strength and victories came from God. In a world that often celebrates ego and self-promotion, David's humility is refreshing and inspiring. This attitude challenges us to maintain the right perspective in our own lives. When we achieve success, whether in our careers, relationships, or personal accomplishments, it is important to remember that our abilities and opportunities are gifts from God. True greatness is not in exalting ourselves, but in using our gifts to serve others and glorify God. A particularly moving aspect of David's life is how he handled failure. Despite being called a man after God's own heart, David was not perfect. He made serious mistakes, including adultery and murder. However, what defines David is not his mistakes, but how he responded to them. When confronted with his sin, David did not try to justify himself or blame others. Instead, he sincerely repented and sought God's forgiveness. Psalm 51, written after his sin with Bathsheba, is a beautiful example of genuine repentance. Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. This part of David's story offers us hope and comfort. We all make mistakes and fail at some point. The message here is that no matter how serious our mistake, there is always room for repentance and restoration. God does not give up on us when we fail. He is always ready to forgive us and give us a new beginning. Another inspiring aspect of David's life is his creativity and emotional expression. Through the Psalms, David shows us how we can honestly open up to God, expressing not only our joy and gratitude, but also our doubts, fears, and sorrows. This teaches us that authentic faith is not a denial of our emotions, but an honest surrender of our whole being to God. This lesson is particularly relevant in our current culture, where there is often pressure to always appear strong and in control. David's vulnerability in the Psalms gives us permission to be authentic in our faith, recognizing that we can bring all our emotions, both the good and the difficult, to God. David's life also teaches us about the importance of true friendships. His friendship with Jonathan is a beautiful example of loyalty and selfless love. At a time when Jonathan could have seen David as a rival for the throne, he chose to support and protect him, even risking his own position. This challenges us to cultivate deep and meaningful friendships in our own lives. In a world increasingly connected digitally, but often emotionally distant, the friendship between David and Jonathan reminds us of the value of authentic and mutual support relationships. Finally, David's story reminds us that our lives are not just about ourselves, but about being part of something greater. David understood that his position as king was not for his own glory, but to serve God's people and fulfill his divine purpose. In the same way, we are called to see our lives not just in terms of personal fulfillment, but as part of God's larger plan for the world. This challenges us to look beyond our immediate circumstances and consider how we can make a difference in the lives of others. Whether through small acts of kindness, using our talents to serve our community, or standing up for those who have no voice, we all have a role to play in God's plan. As we reflect on these lessons from David's life, we are invited to examine our own lives. Where are our Goliaths? How can we face them with faith and courage? How can we cultivate the humility, perseverance, and authenticity we see in David? As we near the end of our journey through David's life, it's important to recognize that his story is not just a historical account, but an invitation to personal transformation. Every challenge David faced, every victory he won, and even every mistake he made, offers us valuable teachings for our own walk of faith. Let's recap some of the main lessons we can take from David's life and how we can apply them to our daily lives. Courage in the face of giants. Just as David faced Goliath, we are called to face our own giants with faith and confidence in God. This may mean confronting fears, overcoming addictions, or facing seemingly impossible situations in our lives. The key is to remember that, like David, we are not alone in this battle. Perseverance in adversity. David's journey from the pasture to the throne was neither direct nor easy. He faced persecution, exile, and many obstacles along the way. This teaches us not to give up when we face difficulties, but to trust in God's timing and keep moving forward, even when the path seems uncertain. Humility and success. Even at the height of his reign, David maintained an attitude of humility, recognizing that his success came from God. This challenges us to keep the right perspective when we achieve our goals, always being grateful and using our blessings to bless others. Genuine repentance. David's mistakes remind us that we all fail, but what matters is how we respond to those failures. David's sincere repentance shows us the path to restoration and reminds us of God's unconditional love and forgiveness. Emotional authenticity. Through the Psalms, David teaches us the importance of being honest with God about all our emotions: joy, sadness, fear, anger. This encourages us to develop an authentic and intimate relationship with God, where we can be true about who we are and how we feel. Valuing true friendships. David's friendship with Jonathan reminds us of the importance of cultivating deep and meaningful relationships. In a world that is increasingly digital and often superficial, we are challenged to invest in friendships that support us, encourage us, and help us grow. Living for a greater purpose. David understood that his life and reign were part of a larger divine plan. In the same way, we are called to see our lives not just in terms of personal fulfillment, but as part of God's purpose for the world. As we reflect on these lessons, it's important to remember that transformation is a process. We should not expect instant changes in our lives, but gradual growth as we apply these truths day by day. How about starting by identifying a Goliath in your life? It could be a fear, a challenge, or a difficult situation. Reflect on how you can face it with the courage and faith of David. Remember, just as David didn't face Goliath with conventional weapons, but with the tools God gave him, you too have unique resources at your disposal. Let's also think about how we can cultivate more humility in our daily lives. This may involve recognizing the contributions of others more often, regularly expressing gratitude, or seeking opportunities to serve without expecting recognition. If you are going through a period of waiting or adversity, like David experienced before becoming king, consider how you can use that time to grow in character and faith. Perhaps it's a time to deepen your study of the Bible, develop new skills, or strengthen important relationships. David's story also encourages us to be more authentic in our emotional expression, especially in our relationship with God. How about starting a prayer journal where you can honestly express your thoughts and feelings to God, just as David did in the Psalms? Finally, reflect on how you can use your gifts and talents to serve others and contribute to God's greater plan. This may involve volunteering in your community, using your professional skills to help an important cause, or simply being more attentive to the needs of those around you. Remember, the story of David is not just about a young shepherd who became a king. It's about an imperfect man who, despite his failures, sought God with all his heart. It's a story that reminds us that God can use any of us, no matter how inadequate we may feel, to accomplish his purposes. As we conclude this journey through David's life, my challenge to you is this: choose one lesson from David's life and commit to applying it to your life this week. It could be facing a fear with bravery, practicing humility in a specific situation, or expressing your emotions honestly to God. Whatever your choice, take that step of faith, trusting that the same God who was with David is with you. We've reached the end of our exploration of David's story. If this video touched your heart and inspired your faith, please give it a like and share it with someone who could be blessed by this message. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do so now and activate the notification bell so you won't miss our next inspiring biblical stories. In the comments, we would love to hear your thoughts. What aspect of David's life has impacted you the most? How do you plan to apply these lessons to your own life? Your experience may be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Remember, just as David faced his challenges with courage and faith, you can also face yours. No matter how big your Goliath is, with God on your side, you can overcome it. Thank you for watching until the end. May the story of David continue to inspire and strengthen your faith. Until the next video, where we will continue our journey through the inspiring stories of the Bible. God bless you.